Welcome to the Patrick Real Estate Show, where we explore the fascinating world of real estate investing with your host, Patrick Switek. Patrick is a dynamic young entrepreneur and an accomplished real estate investor who's passionate about helping others achieve financial freedom. Each week, we sit down with some of the most inspiring individuals in the real estate industry and delve into their personal journeys, lessons learned, and secrets to their success. Let's dive into this week's episode.
Welcome, Steve Trover, to the Patrick Real Estate Show. For the people that want to know who Steve is, he is a veteran in this industry, 28 years in the industry, 20 years as a property manager. So he understands vacation rentals probably better than most. And not only that, but he has a company that helps with hiring. It's a software and a service, and he helps people find really good talents to help them either scale or position their companies in a way to scale through great talent, great resources and just building on an organizational chart. So without further ado, Steve, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate you inviting me on.
Of course, man. And I wanted to just kind of chime in, maybe get a little bit of background on you. I know I gave a little bit of background, but maybe dive a little bit more into how you even got into the industry to begin with.
No, absolutely. I've been in Florida since I was quite young. My family moved here when I was about 12 years old back in 1983, 84. And my mother started selling real estate in the Orlando market near Disney World. And so she sold primarily general real estate back then in the 80s and 90s. However, occasionally a couple would come in and want to buy a vacation rental. They didn't call it that, though. They'd call it a holiday home because they were typically British. The British kind of started the STR space here in the Central Florida market. She would sell them a house and then refer them to a management company that she had tried to research to find the best one for her clients. And so over and over again, they'd come back a year later and say, Sue, love the house, but the management company referred us to is not getting it done. And so she heard this so often that she really didn't feel good about selling STRs, but it was really lucrative, wanted to continue to do it. And I was a serial entrepreneur. I've started 16 companies over the last 34 years, and I'd started a few businesses prior to starting what ended up being a management company, and thought, how hard can this short-term rental thing be? 28 years later, I can tell you it's actually pretty hard business. And I'd say it's one of the toughest businesses, but also a very rewarding business as well. There's a lot of really cool components to it. So I set out with $1,000 of startup capital in a little office about 20 miles east of where I'm sitting in a little town near Disney World, and started a management company and scaled that over the course of 2 decades from 0 to 400 properties under management. We were in 4 destinations here in Orlando. We opened up in Captiva Island, Florida, Sun Valley, Idaho, and bought a company in San Diego, California. And so we spread across country and had 400 units. We also had a development company called Purpose Built Vacation Homes. So we would design, spec, and build purpose-built vacation rentals going back almost 15 years ago now, I think maybe longer. And also had an interior design company and furnished over 500 STR properties over the course of the 2 decades that we had that. And those properties we would sell through our real estate company, and then they would come into the management company. So it's vertically integrated. I also created a proprietary property management software going back around 2000, started building that, maybe 99. And that ultimately became a company called LiveRes, and about 1,000 companies use that to run their businesses today. I was the chief strategy officer as a part-time job, an early shareholder in that platform. And then I'm the former vice president and president of the International Trade Association called the Vacation Rental Managers Association. So it's been around since the mid-'80s, but I was... VRMA. So I was vice president for 5 years, going back about a decade ago. So all that said, sold my group of companies about 8 years ago now, started consulting for vacation rental managers all over the country, and started really getting into the talent side of things. I've been doing psychometric testing in my hiring for 15 years now, and really liked that, and started introducing that to clients. And that kind of parlayed into, at the beginning of the pandemic, us launching a company called Better Talent. And so April 2020, right when everything got locked down, we decided to start a talent company. And so everyone got laid off. The good news is they weren't laid off very long. So everybody was rehired. And so it really was not by design, but it became a really good time to launch the company Today, we work with over 300, almost 350 vacation rental, short-term rental companies across the country, and we do all their hiring. So we help them with full-time, part-time, independent contractors, consultants, that type of thing. So that's my kind of long story, sorry, but of
No,
the background. So
it was very, because you have a lot to pack in there, so you had to just get it all in there.
yeah, exactly.
And I didn't know that first of all, I didn't know that you bought a management company in San Diego. That's really interesting. But second of all, it seems like talent is something that is really critical to the growth of a company, yet alone multiple companies. And I feel like that's an integral part of just having a really good team. The fact that you got into better talent is huge. Funny enough, I think I had deja vu because I'm putting the two worlds together. I got laid off in 2020 from Avance,
Okay.
and I found better talent now that I'm thinking about it, because I remember the name. Did you
Wow.
guys ever do like a form to fill out for anybody
Yes, we
that
did
got?
early on. Yeah, on the talent side. Yep.
Yeah, it was like Airtable or something. I remember specifically seeing a bunch of
That's
people from
funny.
Sonder and everywhere else. I was like, oh, and I filled out something, but nothing came of it, which is fine. I went a different direction, but still ended up in the industry. So thank you for that. That's
So
really
glad.
how you launched that at the perfect time. So
Yeah, no, and sadly, a lot of people, like I said, got laid off. But the good news is this industry came roaring back, and everybody got jobs, so that was good. So,
big time. So obviously, there's a lot of stuff we can go into, and your background is very impressive. But I do think that one thing that a lot of people probably really want to know is, how do you really build out a team, right? Let's start from scratch. Let's start ground one, right? In the beginning, who do you need to be part of your team to be able to suffice a rental at the bare minimum? Let's just talk about that. And then from there, we can build up into scaling a business. But yeah.
so one thing that I encourage early stage founders to do in this industry, if they're going to scale a portfolio of STRs, is think about the things that you like doing, because at the early stage you're not going to go out and hire a bunch of people unless you raised a bunch of capital and did it that way. Most people are going to do it incrementally over time. So in my case, when I look back to the very beginning of what I did, I knew I didn't like finance. Accounting was not my jam, so I needed a bookkeeper pretty quickly or I was going to go out of business. So that was a big thing for me. But what I encourage everybody to do is write down all the things that you're doing, even if you have two properties, in almost like a org chart style. And if you think about it, if you have two properties, you're doing marketing, you're putting them on the channels, you're doing whatever, you may have a website already. You are doing all the operational components, housekeeping, maintenance, guest services, guest comms. You're doing owner relations if you have any owners that you're managing for. You're doing finance. And so there's all of those different things that make up what would be a whole company or team of people. You've got your name on every single one of the hats. If it's you as a sole proprietor, if you already have one or two people, their names are on some of those hats, but multiple hats, no doubt, right, for each one of the individuals until you get to scale. And what I did is I said, okay, what are the things that I do not like to do, that I procrastinate doing, and that I would be much better suited outsourcing? So it's not a simple, oh, you hire an ops manager first or you hire this first. It's actually the things that you are the worst at and do not like doing. That's where I focus on first. And sometimes that's a full-time employee, sometimes it's a contractor early on until you scale. And one of the most important things to growing a vacation rental company is growing. So if you're good in sales, meaning you can grow inventory of properties, then you're in really good shape. If you can't or you don't like that, you better find that pretty quickly. So that's a key one from a growth perspective, because if you can grow, you can start to afford to build a full team of people for all the things that you don't like doing. So, by the way, homeowners love talking to the owner of the company over any salesperson. So if you are reasonably good at sales, that's where I would focus. And I spent a lot of time early on, obviously, on that, in that focus, growing the inventory of the business and then outsourcing all the other pieces. So
Steve, so you were really good at the growth, right? You really didn't like the accounting aspect of things. Is there other things that you really liked focusing on other than that? What are some of the other things like in your journey that you've started outsourcing pretty early on?
Yeah, what I realized that in housekeeping and housekeeping management is such a critical pillar in this industry. If you don't do that, it doesn't matter how good you are in sales and marketing, you're going to fail. And so I was not good at that. I had to have somebody running that part of it. And that really ultimately became all of ops, meaning anything with regards to property management, I should not be doing on a day-to-day basis. Quite frankly, it's not what I was designed to do. I was much better in sales and marketing. And so I founded an operations manager. We had a housekeeping manager and a maintenance manager and overtime services manager. And those individuals would run those departments, if you will, as we scaled. But initially, it was just individuals doing all of those different things early on because I did not want to focus on ops. I will tell you, one of my biggest mistakes is I stayed way too long in the general manager role, and meaning I was still quote unquote over operations. I ultimately hired one. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Took way too long for me to pull that trigger, and I should have done it early on.
What
But,
is
but yeah,
can I intervene real quick? What
absolutely,
is,
of course.
can you specify like general manager? Like what is that really, what is the responsibility of a general manager? Because I think language is important here.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
titles can mean a lot of different things, but
Mhm.
in the way that, in the context of what I consider a scaled vacation rental manager, the GM is essentially second in command after the founder, right? You can call yourself president, CEO, whatever you want to call it on that side. But the GM is really that person that runs the day-to-day operations. Some general managers are just over ops, housekeeping, maintenance, guest services. Other general managers are over everything: marketing, reservations, accounting, business development. So it just depends on how scaled the organization is and where you want that person. There is not, a lot of times people will ask me, what's the industry standard for that? One of the things I love about this industry is there's not a whole lot of standards, quite frankly. There's a lot of different ways to skin it, makes it fun.
Yeah.
So there's not like a definitive way that it's done. If somebody tells you that, I'd love to talk to them because there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But my view is you really have to, you really, if you do not like ops, you need a strong operations person, either an operations director, operations manager, or a general manager.
Perfect. And it's interesting. I'm going to start relating my business to this because I think this will be interesting to hear. I have a COO, so I guess that's my general manager. I hired her pretty early on, and she deals with building like infrastructure, like building systems, building SOPs for maintenance, for cleaning. And what's funny is like a lot of these, I wish I would have talked to maybe 6 months ago because the cleaning department was a shit show. So everything else in my business was starting to fall apart because I think I had a good person, the right person, but I think maybe the role wasn't right for her. So I think that's what happened. And because of that, the rest of the company was, things were just not falling 100% into place. And it was hard to let go of that person because I really liked them and I still like them to this day.
Yeah.
So I think that was my biggest mistake, to be honest. And the housekeeping stuff as was a pillar of everything beyond.
Yeah, I
Hired
always
a
say
new
you
one.
can do all this, attract new owners, attract guests, get guests to show up, be world class at marketing, have great revenue management, blah, blah, blah. They show up, walk in the door, and the house isn't cleaned right. None of that matters. It's a fail. So better have housekeeping in order for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, in your case, and by the way, GM is one way to call it, COO is another. It's really that second in command. There's a book I recommend everyone listening read, and it's called Rocket Fuel.
I love
It's
that
part
book.
of the Traction series. Are you familiar with the book? I take it.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's your integrator who you're
Yep.
talking about with your COO.
100%.
And I've got one in the other room here running this company. He's my only direct report, and half the time I call him my boss, and he leads and holds the team accountable. And so having somebody like that as a visionary is imperative in my view.
Can we
So
maybe, for the people who are listening, can we just dive into what an integrator versus visionary is? Because I have my integrator and she's awesome. She doesn't like being in the public eye. She doesn't want to, she loves just sitting down and getting work done. For me, I'm like counting down the days till I go into market and do sales. Like I have a couple sales calls in the market. I can't wait to go there and just be in front of people. I can't wait to get home and get on my desk and just crank these things out. So it's like really different. I'm curious. Yeah, like maybe you can explain a little bit about
And
that.
you just described the classic visionary integrator duo. Visionaries, we create, we come up with new business ideas, new business models, we go into new markets. We tend to be pretty positive and we usually can sell, is what generally you see in a visionary. The integrator is the one that comes in and makes all those dreams happen. Or maybe not all the dreams, because visionaries tend to have a lot of different ideas, but taking those best ones and boiling that down to the ones that are best for the company and then executing on that. And there's one of my favorite quotes is vision without execution is nothing but a dream. And so if you don't have somebody doing the execution early on in your company, that's going to be you. But the faster you can get that person in place, and then if it's an ops manager, a GM, a COO, title, smitle, it's that second in command that executes on the vision that you put forth, right?
Wow, that is amazing. I'm glad we're having this. You're speaking my language. And one thing that you did mention, to know that it's an integrator, you have to go through, how do you know that's an integrator, right? You said you do, I didn't know the exact word, but you do tests to figure out personality types, so people are in the best roles for their personality type. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back years and years ago, I started doing personality testing in my companies. And when we first started, we just did it on everybody that was already on the team, and then realized pretty quickly, like, this doesn't make sense. We should do it before we hire them. And so started using it way back when, over 15 years ago. It changed my world, because before, when I would get upset with Mike because Mike wasn't doing X, Y, or Z, but then I understood Mike's personality traits actually did not align with the job. I was getting mad at Mike for being Mike, essentially. And so what do you do with that? Maybe there's another role that is better suited for Mike, but from a hiring perspective, if I can learn that information at the beginning, in fact, what we do today is we profile somebody at the point at which they apply. So the first thing they do once they hit the application button is they get a survey sent to them. It's a self-selection psychometric test. It's been scientifically proven with over 500 validity studies. It takes 5 minutes. And so
is it a predictive index?
It is predictive index.
Nice.
Yes. And so I've been using this type of psychometric for, again, 15 years. We're a partner with PI, and that's integrated into our platform. So that's the first thing we do, is set the job target based on the particular needs of that job. So in this case, if we're talking about an integrator, generally speaking, we're needing somebody that's assertive, self-confident, not afraid to have tough conversations when they need to with somebody, right? It's going to happen in that role. Somewhat socially capable, somewhat social and outgoing, very fast paced. There's a lot of different variation in the workday for an integrator. They're not single task focused. They're bouncing around doing different things. And then somebody that's really a balance of precise or flexible with rules and structure. In PI and predictive index, there's one called the captain profile. That's our favorite integrator profile. The strategists can be good, persuaders can be good, but captain's really the one that we like best for that particular role.
I love that.
If you have one, great. And sometimes there's integrators that work out with completely different profiles than that. And then we look at that person and say, okay, do they have learned behaviors around the gaps in their personality, right? And so I'm a Maverick profile. Probably, Patrick, you're a Maverick profile.
I'm a Maverick.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I do a little bit of integration, but like high level. I can't really dig too deep. Yeah.
Mavericks they're typically all visionary. About half of the scaled STR management companies in this country are owned or founded by Mavericks, believe it or not. So I've got pretty good data around that. And yet the Maverick is not a good, strong execution person. They don't have good follow through, follow up, detail orientation. They're very out of the box, almost too out of the box, if you will. And so we need somebody that's a little more inside the box that will execute at the same time. And that's that captain profile. So,
yeah, that honestly, I do have a captain on my team, and they're a manager. They're an incredible manager. Because it's funny, because I did the test too to everybody, and we call him Captain Jeff, because I kept referring to him as captain, because I was like, dude, he's a captain. This is why he's so good at this. And so everyone started calling him Captain Jeff, and we love it. So we rock and roll. So cool. So what about, obviously that dynamic is really important. You said the foundation of the whole company is cleaning. That's a big stepping foundation. So curious, like for somebody that heads the cleaning department, what is their personality trait that makes it most optimal for that kind of role?
Yeah, and even in that role, a captain would certainly work. But generally speaking, we're looking for somebody with a little bit more detail orientation and follow through in that role. We also don't need somebody as social and outgoing. They're going to have very strong conversations and be very objective. And so there's the one called the controller we really liked for housekeeping manager jobs, but there's a number of different profiles that will work. But it really comes down to somebody who can have tough conversations, they're assertive, handle a lot of variation in the workday, but also have that strong follow through, which is really key. And also be data driven in their approach to housekeeping, right? Is it cleaned properly to the way that we set it up? And having a good inspection process and having training for housekeepers is key as well. So all of those different
100%.
pieces.
So I'm always curious with predictive index. Some things that I have doubts in my head sometimes. I'm like, how? Not me personally. I believe in the process. I know it's studied, it's proven.
Sure.
But when I tell like my co-founder, I have a business partner co-founder, I tell him about this predictive index stuff. He's like, how can you really tell off of a 5-minute thing like that? It's so hard. So what do you say to something like that?
Yeah, so when you look at the construct of the survey, it looks like a 2-question survey, right? And so anybody that takes it, it only takes 5 minutes, they're like, how could that get anything? It's actually 180 questions. It's 90 adjectives that you're selecting or not selecting twice over the course of 5 or 10 minutes, however long it takes you. But it's 180 questions. That's filtered into an algorithm that has been tested and retested for 70 years. It's actually came out of World War II, was where the original data and study around it. That has been optimized over and over again. In fact, PI recently spent millions of dollars changing the adjectives that were used to today's nomenclature because we don't use the same words that we used 90s or the 80s, for example. Some of us still do. But so that's all been up to date as well as the tech stack, and it's been tested, and it is accurate as anything you'll ever find. Now, are there others? Sure. DISC, Myers-Briggs, Charles Clark. There's a number of different really good psychometric tests and valid tests. Why I like this particular one and why we've incorporated it into our process is the speed. Most of those take 20, 30 minutes. This one's as accurate and it only takes 5.
Wow. But you're so right. That blew my mind. You said there's 60 questions, you said?
90 adjectives
90.
selected twice. So it's a 180 question test.
Because it's a binary, right? Yes or no.
Yep.
Ah, that makes sense.
But
you're
people
not
don't think
saying
of that as a question. They think of the
Yeah.
one question that's asked and they only count it as one. So
I love
but
that.
It's 90. Yeah.
Cool. What else do you do in like hiring people? I think hiring people is a lot of different aspects, right? Personality is one of them. Sorry?
Yeah, that's just one data point of many that we look at for sure.
Right.
Sorry, go
So I'm
ahead.
curious, what are those data points that you also look at for people in this industry, right? It takes a certain character, I feel like, to be in this industry in a sense that it's obviously it can be very draining. I don't know how you did 28 years, to be honest, because I'm at year like 3 and I'm
Tired.
dying here, man.
Yeah.
I'm like, I always tell people, I'm like, this is a young person game.
Yeah.
Here's Steve over here. He's got some white hairs, but he's freaking going. He's trucking along. Appreciate it, dude. Like, how did you end up? I'm curious, like, what kind of personality does that take? What kind of other criteria do you look at when you're hiring people?
So we do look at resume, but that really matters very little. Resume is actually not a good predictor of whether somebody's going to be successful in a role. Now, that said, if I have somebody that has a strong background in hospitality, whether that's hotel or VR, STR, that's fine. If they have strong STR background, hey, that's great. It's never a negative. It's always a positive, just not necessarily a strong predictor. So then we do predictive index. We got personality tests. For mid to high level roles, we also do cognitive testing. How fast does that person learn new things and adapt to change? And a lot of change happens in this industry. I've been watching it for close to 3 decades. It hasn't slowed down. It's only sped up. And if you're not able to run with that change and flex with that change, you're probably not going to be ideal for certain roles in the organization. Now, if it's operational and it's pretty much block and tackle, that's okay. Don't need a high cog for that. But if it's on the marketing side or biz dev, leadership, we're probably going to look at that as well. And then it really comes down to a structured interview process. We really want to know, does this person align with the core values of the business? And so when we build the structured interview guides, we have them in our platform. We encourage companies to have listed core values, and we ask questions specific to each one of those core values or have them ask those questions. The other thing I will say, and this is non-scientific, but it's because you can't scientifically test for it, but it's grit, right? And
Mhm.
when you think about the grind of what this is and how much you have to do and do well, and like you say, it's a tiring, you better have some grit factor. And grit factor, roughly defined, is just those people that just persevere. Like no matter what happens, they just work their way through whatever problem that is to get something done. And so I have some questions I like to ask in an interview, one of which is, when was the first time you made money as a young person in your life? And if somebody says, I mowed lawns or what, and nowadays they wouldn't do that, they'd probably do something else, but that's great. That's what I want to hear, is somebody that was grinding from the word go. If they say, my dad got me an internship when I got out of college, probably not a lot of grit factor. Maybe still, it's not scientific, but it's just an indicator. So there's questions like that that you want to, is this person that's going to be somebody that can persevere through the hard times? Because you get into the season, you get into the spring season here in Orlando, and you have a little break between spring and summer, and then you go to summer. By the end of summer, you're dead, especially in ops. So better have some grit factor.
Wow. Yeah. And with that, like, you're talking about testing people and getting to know them. What have you found in terms of like interviews is the most effective process of sourcing talent? Like from maybe from inception of, okay, the marketing of the listing, the marketing of the opportunity, where do you put that? And then going and following through with what kind of tasks slash interviews. You have 3 interviews, you have 2 interviews. Like, I'm curious, like, how you found it to be most effective for you.
So everybody, when I get on a call with them and I start first talking about where are you listing, it's almost always Indeed, right? Indeed's
Yeah.
the Airbnb of people, if you will.
Right.
And so, of course, you're going to list there. But the problem with Indeed is they've got rapid apply, where you can apply for 100 jobs without filling it. You put your resume in once and you just hit this button. And so people do that. Most of the times when we call people that have applied on Indeed, they don't even remember what company they applied for or what the job was. We have to remind them, which is pretty telling of what they were doing. Nothing wrong with that. It does produce a lot of resumes, but then you have to go through all those resumes, base who you're going to interview on that. And so we don't do it that way. What I recommend is, just like I would recommend from a marketing perspective for your properties, you don't just put them on Airbnb, right? You put them in a lot of places. You have a direct channel, you have all the different components of the marketing. Marketing for talent's the same, right? So we push this across a tremendous amount of channels, just like we would for a vacation rental property. But we also do outbound sourcing of applicants. And that's part of what we do, as we reach out directly, introducing the opportunity to passive applicants using a lot of different technology and tools. We've also amassed a talent database in this industry of over 300,000 people that
Wow.
are in that database that have background and experience in STR vacation rentals. And so when we need them, that's where we go shop, right? And we're looking for, the right personality, but also maybe some background and experience in the space.
Amazing.
So it's a lot of different things. It's email marketing, it's social media marketing, it's job posting, it's outbound sourcing. But I want to get as many people into the funnel as I possibly can.
It's like having a direct booking website. Just, you have your list of emails that you can message. So
We think of it much like I did back when I was 100% direct as a VRM for almost 2 decades, and we're very strong on internet marketing. We took that same mindset into talent.
I love that. That's so cool. And so from there, like, how many interviews do you usually do to get the right person? Do you need to spend a specific amount of time, 30 minutes on an interview, or is there no like real rhyme or reason?
Yeah, we have recommendations based on the role. Frontline housekeepers, you're not going to have to do 2 interviews, right? It's really different in that regard relative to if you're going to hire your integrator. You're going to fly them in. If they're from out of the area, you're going to have dinner with them. That's a big decision. And so it's kind of the goalpost is housekeeper to integrator on how broad that gets. Mid to high level roles, I recommend at least 2 interviews. We basically filter the applicants down to the best ones in our platform, and then we provide an interviewing platform to be able to do that. But we don't do the interviewing because I want the client has to interview them. Like you have to pick your person, right?
It's got to be a good
Not us.
connection. Do you recommend hiring VAs? I know that's been a really big trend in the last I don't know, 5 years specifically, I know people have been really gunning for, hey, get virtual assistants. It's more affordable and you can scale and it's more lean. I'm curious, like, what's the balance of like on-site personnel versus VAs? Because I know some people that are running full VA companies. I'm like, I don't know if that's like 100% there, because having somebody on site and knows the market is, I'm curious, like,
Right.
what's your take on all that?
Yes, I'm a big proponent of VAs, first of all, but not for every role. And so these companies that are doing it all out, I don't want to stay there. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't have high confidence if
Mhm.
you're doing 100% that way because I haven't seen it work yet. And I'm all about using technology, limit the amount of staff you have. Okay. We're a recruiting company and I don't tell you to hire people when you shouldn't hire somebody. In fact, I'm more out to talk you out of it because that's the biggest cost structure of one of these companies. And one of the ways to reduce that is VAs. And so what we do is we have a VA marketplace. We work with multiple partners across the Philippines, Colombia, other countries, and we take that VA through the same process we would a US-based person, personality testing, all the different components I just already talked about,
Mhm.
simply to make sure that they're a right fit. Because what a lot of people do is they just go, okay, XYZ staffing company, send me something. Here's Mike. We don't know if Mike can do the job, right? I view them exactly the same way. We have 6 people on our team in the Philippines. I love them. We treat them exactly like they're here, right? So they
Absolutely.
have offsites in the Philippines that we do and all that. And they're a great team, but they're the right people for the right seats in our organization. And there are a number of seats, even within Better Talent. I would not use somebody in the Philippines, not because they're not capable from an intellect perspective or anything like that. It's just simply, to your point, that localized knowledge, being on the time zone, all of those different components are really important for a VRM or STR manager. So guest communications via chat, live chat, email, etc., no problem. Those are great. I have yet to see finance work
Mhm.
overseas. So trust accounting, which is imperative. We can talk about that in a second. Don't see that working real well over there. Outsourcing biz dev to another market is tough. So there's just a lot of roles I would not recommend that. If they're client facing during the middle of the day here and they want to talk to somebody that knows the market, knows the properties, probably doesn't work either, right? So there's a number of different roles I don't think I would recommend for
And
that, but there are a number of that
communication
I do.
is big, right? Like, communication is a big one that you would recommend.
Yeah, communication when we're talking digital communication,
Mhm.
especially, right?
Yeah.
And the reason is emails and chat and text and all that on the platforms that they're on Verbo or Airbnb. A VA can do that. That's no problem with all the tools we have today. They're not going to skip a beat. Nobody will
Or
even
ven
know it's a
Yeah.
VA, right? So,
Yeah, vendor is interesting because vendor, like, we're realizing that we try to get them to do vendor and owner relations and stuff like that. It can get really tricky there with, especially with vendor stuff. Like, they don't know sometimes if that's like really, oh my God, this is you. We need somebody out there ASAP. A water heaters. They don't understand sometimes certain things. Um,
troubleshooting and that type of thing.
troubleshooting,
Yeah.
right? Exactly. But
Yeah.
some of them do. I'm realizing that they're better, like, to be an assistant to like the property managers on site is what I've realized been a lot better of a way
Agreed.
of doing it.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, the more structure you have around something, around a role and detail, this is what you do, the if and what. If you have that, then you can use them more. If you don't, if you have no structure, they're just going to be lost because they're going to do what the rules say. So
Absolutely.
that's another key.
Wow, that's huge. So let's talk about org charts, because I know you've also mentioned that you help companies scale through understanding their org chart.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, this has been, I'll be honest, for me personally, this is something that I've constantly restructured so many times. I can't even tell you, Steve. Like, I've worked from, oh, I'm going to work only on functions, right? Like, we
Yep.
have inspectors, we have client relations, whatever, and then realize, wait, once we get to a certain point, I got to hire 3 additional people. And then it's what's more scalable, what's possible, what's not. I'm talking to other managers. They're relying more on the cleaners. They have 2 property managers for 200 units. And I'm like, how are you doing that? Like, in my market, we have the cleaners. We can't rely on them. Like, we need a second set of eyes always. And we always do arrival inspections. And so now, like, we are limited. And so I'm curious, like, what structures you've seen probably a lot of structures, but being in Orlando, it's literally the most competitive market in the country. Number one, what works in terms of structure that you've seen?
And here, this goes back to the lack of kind of industry standards and structure.
Hmm.
I rarely find two companies that are alike, whether that's in the way that they structure themselves, the properties they manage, the logistical challenges. I had it for several years. All my properties were within 2 miles of my office. Easy, right? When we start spreading across Central Florida and then out into other destinations, completely changed the game. And so it's highly dependent on the particular company that we're talking about, where they're at, what the optimal structure is. One thing that we use around better talent is we use the term people stack. And so everybody has a tech stack. We all know what that is. And it used to be that was a word that developers would use, but now everybody
Hmm.
uses it. And that's just all the different technologies that you use to run your business. If you think about people, we have a stack of them as well. We have full-time, part-time, independents. We've got virtual assistants, maybe consultants, that type of thing. And so the answer to the question is not as simple as here's the perfect model. It's okay, here's our properties, here's where they are, here's what we have, what is the most optimized model based on those different parameters. And an example would be in Orlando, yeah, it's a super competitive market, but I had competitors here that would say, man, it's really hard to find talent in Orlando. I'm like, are you kidding me? We got 2.5 million people in the metro. Try hiring in Captiva Island. And so it's highly dependent on where you're located. If you're in Big Sky, Montana, and there's 2,000 humans, you're probably going to be hard pressed to find a really good digital marketing manager. So the structure may change. It's not an in-office structure; it's a remote, depending on where you're at and what the logistics are. I'd love to give you this. Here's the perfect map of what every company should look like, but there's not really a one-size-fits-all solution. But that's part of what we do is we dig in and go, okay, let's build the optimized stack for this particular company at this point in
Yeah.
time. The second thing we do is go, okay, where are you going, Patrick? How many properties do you want to manage in a year from now and 2 years from now? And then we build a people plan to go along with your business plan. Because most people don't have that. They have a business plan and they got a spreadsheet, and we're like, this is where we're going to go, going to the moon. How many people do we need to have on our team to get to the moon?
Yeah.
And when do we need to get them on the team? And so there needs
Right.
to be a plan around that.
That is awesome. And you're so right. It is unconventional when I've talked to so many people and have different kind of org structures. And I'll be honest, I feel so alone because I just sometimes don't know what's happening. I just guess. And people ask me all the time, like, how are you structured? I'm like, this is the way I'm structured, but I don't know if that's going to really relate to you because you're in this area, so it's a little different. So I can relate to that a lot, honestly.
And there's not a one size fits all tech stack either, right? There's different platforms that work depending on the scale of the company and logistics and location and all that as well. So it's the same problem, whether it's tech or people, but there is an optimal way to do it for every company. And so one of the values we thought we could bring is because we get to look at so many hundreds of them, we get to see the different structures and go, you know what, that would work really good over here, and so on and so forth. And so we can help clients optimize.
Yeah. What are the commonalities of all companies? Like all companies have this role or all companies have some form of this. I'm curious what the commonality in terms of roles and structure go. Yeah. Because you
Well,
said integrator visionary, that's the commonality, right? Every company has could have some
sometimes
sort
the
of that.
visionary is still the integrator, and that's yeah. So
But yeah.
that the roles are there. Sometimes it's one person, right? And that's it goes for depending on scale across the whole board. So the common roles, obviously, you have to have housekeepers. At
Yes.
some point, you have to have somebody, or at the beginning, even you have to have somebody managing the housekeepers. Now that may be the integrator because we're not to the scale. We need a housekeeping manager, but ultimately, you're going to need a housekeeping manager. We have maintenance. A lot of companies, early stage, they just use maintenance contractors. They don't actually have any maintenance techs. But when you get to a certain scale, all of a sudden it makes sense from a quality control perspective and even an economic perspective to have maintenance techs on your team. As you scale, I had, I think, 17 maintenance techs at one
Mm.
point, have to have a maintenance leadership structure. And so there's that. Business development. A lot of times that's the visionary doing the biz dev, growing the inventory. At some point, you hire one. I hired a guy named Brooke Faust, and then I hired a guy named Brian Riggs. They started a company called Ventori,
I
and now
know
they do that
Brooke.
for all
Interesting.
the managers across the
Mhm.
country now. And but early on it was just me. And then when I hired Brooke and Brian, they would do the sales. And getting somebody that can grow the inventory at some point is really key. And that's a common thread. Finance. if you don't do trust accounting in this industry, get out of this industry. So if you're holding rents for a third party, an owner, unless if you're doing co-hosting and you don't have cash coming through that's not yours, that's fine. But if you're a property manager who's bringing in money, you have to do trust accounting. And the problem with trust accounting is not very many people know what it is. If you went to a CPA, they would say, "Oh yeah, I know what that is." They don't know what it is in the context of an STR company or very control. Very much imperative to know what buckets of money are where within your organization so you can sleep well at night. And so having somebody in finance is a common thing that knows trust accounting, whether that's a third party service like Trust Synthesis or one of the others, or you bring in and do it yourself. Marketing, everybody does marketing. So at some point you might have a marketing manager or a marketing coordinator. I ultimately had a full digital ad agency in my company. So I had a CMO and I had content, social media marketing, and copywriting, and all the different pieces of photography, videography, graphic design. So built out a whole digital ad agency. Early on, that might be a vendor. And then you might bring on a coordinator.
So you guys did social media for your clients or just for your
For
company?
the company. Yeah,
Got
for
it.
the company.
Yeah.
We had 200,000 Facebook followers in my BRM, and we really focused on social media. This is, again, over a decade
Direct
ago we're talking
bookings.
about. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Staying in
awesome.
front of your customers is really key with direct bookings. But yeah, so that's a common one.
Yeah.
And
Revenue
then,
manager.
I mean, property
Revenue
manager,
manager.
what is it?
Revenue manager.
Oh, revenue management. Yeah, absolutely. And that's one where early on, I don't recommend a full-time employee in the role. There's a lot of different partners that we work with that you can outsource it to on a fractional basis. But at a certain scale, probably closing in on 80, 100 properties, you need somebody in that role. It makes sense to have them in that role,
I
depending
think we're
on,
there, Steve.
or yeah, you're like, I need somebody.
I'm already ready for that, but we might have to talk offline on that.
Yeah, yeah. We know a few people in that regard. So yeah, so that's a big one. So I'm trying to think of anything I might have.
We talked about property managers, right? But
Yeah, in some markets you'll hear that term property manager, and that's really like an ops manager, I would say. So it depends on now. Part of why that term is like in South Carolina, North Carolina, you hear it a lot because you actually have to be a licensed real estate agent to be a property manager in certain markets. So you hear those terms, but it's not necessarily a title you have to use in most markets. So
awesome. Yeah. That's a good rundown of just like holistically how everything looks for growth. Now, I'm curious, now being in this industry for so long and seeing so many people and talking to so many clients, what are some of the common mistakes with people scaling their business and what they make? I know you mentioned some of your mistakes, not hiring fast enough that general manager, but I'm curious, just like through talking to so many people, what are the big things in terms of scale and growth?
yeah, strong financial controls, number one. You don't understand where your money's at. Again, don't even be in this business. It's tough. So that helps us to understand what we can afford from a people perspective to do the things. And then this number one thing I see is people waiting too long, like I did, to get the integrator. I'm really glad to hear you have one. Good job, 3 years in. That's awesome. You don't see that a lot. A lot of times I see that person staying in that role, the visionary, way, way too long. So that's a big mistake. The other thing I see, and I was guilty of this, and by the way, most of what I teach on is something I screwed up, just to be completely honest, but is hiring somebody that is the wrong person for the role. And you mentioned the person you had to let go, but you really like them. Good job, because a lot of people don't do that. They leave.
I didn't let them go. They left
They
because they
left.
were out
Yeah.
of place.
Yeah.
I didn't have the heart to do it, and I thought
Couldn't
it
do
was
it.
gonna. So Steve, I made that mistake. So I suck at that.
Most people do, because we want to be nice people. Firing people is one of the worst things you could ever do. It's terrible. I hate it. I sound like I like it sometimes because I've stood on stages and I say, look, if you got somebody on the team right now and you don't want to fire them, let's jump on a Zoom with them tomorrow. I'll do it. And I hate it as much as anybody. But my point is, I don't want you to do that to yourself, to the rest of the people on your team, or that individual. And you're hurting that person by leaving them there. They know, they can feel they're in the wrong. They feel it from their team members, from you. They know they're in the wrong seat. They're hesitant to make the move sometimes. And sometimes you wait it out and they leave like they did in your case.
But
that can be years.
But that I know, but I hate that because I love her. Like she's such a great person, and I felt like I felt sometimes like I didn't do enough. So it's so difficult.
And It probably wasn't even her fault. It probably wasn't your fault. It's
It
just
wasn't
it
her
wasn't a
fault.
good fit. And
Yeah.
so that's why we spend so much time pulling data points together to get the right person, because I hate this more than I hate putting somebody in the wrong seat. It's
Yeah.
the worst. And by the way, we drink our own Kool-Aid here over at Better Talent. We're 4.5 years in. We got close to 20 people on the team. We've had zero turnover. Zero.
Wow.
And everyone, I will tell you, is 100% in the right seat. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying we use our methodology and we live by it. It's going to happen. We're going to have turnover at some point, obviously, but we've been able to do that really well by drinking our own Kool-Aid, if you will. So it does work.
Absolutely. Dang. Well, so you guys have been 4 years, you have 20 people. What are some other things that you see in terms of maybe not yourself as much, but maybe other people that you see when scaling a business? Is there something that people do or do not do that is detrimental to the success of the company and growing it to 200, 300, 400 units?
Absolutely. So I alluded to it earlier.
Yeah.
Everybody should have a business plan, and it doesn't have to be this like old school business plan, but everybody has ChatGPT. You can build one. It takes you no time at all, and you can adjust it and make a full, and it should have every component. Now, along with that business plan should be a people plan, and that has to be tied to finance. And so if we have a projection and we're building the projection of growth, and as we add properties, this is what it's going to look like from a revenue perspective, from a margin perspective, from a net profit perspective. And then we lace in the cost structure of those people that we're going to need to be able to do that. And I will tell you, I didn't do that. I just built as I went. I didn't necessarily have a strong plan in that regard. And it was really easy to get top heavy, to get way too many people on the team, too much payroll, too much cost. And that whether it's full-time payroll or contractor, it's still cost. So not having a plan for that is one of the biggest mistakes.
How do you know when you're paying too much in payroll? Like,
when
how do
you
you?
don't have any money at the end of the month. Okay. You look at it and go, okay, here's our trailing P&L and here's our projected P&L that is a reasonable expectation. Right. And so, yeah, but cash is king. You'll know when you're heavy. And again, mistakes I've made, I left too many people on the team when I should have been cutting back and doing things like that. So those are things that I can't say enough about. You need to be watching your numbers all the time and tying your people plan to that on who to hire and when.
I mean, what are profit margins in this industry supposed to be like? I talked to Jacoby a little bit about it. He said, he gave me like rough estimate, of course. He's like, all right, 20, I think like 30% pay, and he was like profit margins are like 25%, 25. I don't know if that's what do you usually see in terms of like profit margins like is healthy, and you know that you're not.
So it depends on if you're talking top or middle to bottom, and I'll explain that in a second. On the percentage of salaries, I think when I know Jacoby really well, 30%, for example, he's probably talking about FTEs. We add in all of the people cost. So if that's contractors like housekeepers or maintenance, like everything, and that usually is in the 45%, sometimes higher, depending on the type of company it is, how high touch they are, if there's employees, housekeeping employees, that type of thing. And so you got to look at it from that perspective. If you get over 50, unlikely you're going to be making much profit at all. Definitely want to keep it below that. But what I see from top to bottom, so let's say you did $10 million in total revenue, rental revenue, including the owner rents, and maybe you make 30% of that or whatever is gross profit, 30, 35. That company is probably going to throw in a healthy company $1 million to the net in a $10 million company. So it's about 10% of top line revenue. If he's saying 2025, he's talking about as a percentage of your gross profit.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Which is essentially the same number.
Got it. Wow. I gotta get my crap together. I've been in it for a year and a half, like in management. So, I feel like I'm still a young company.
Oh yeah.
And brand new. Like 9 months in is when we hired 9 months in? No, I think it was like 6 to 9 months in. We hired our
Good job. You did it way better than I did. So yeah. I think I waited
Yeah, I
a
was like, I'm
decade.
not doing this stuff forever. I
Yeah.
cannot be in this business like this. Cool, Steve. I feel like we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to respect your time and everybody else's. So I'm going to close into the last three questions for
Okay.
you, one of them being special for you, just for you. But yeah, what educational resource do you believe has been instrumental to your career, just in general? It could be anything.
I have a few, but I'll name them. Books, absolutely. I have a library of books that I recommend, from marketing to structure to all the different components, leadership. So that was huge for me. Networking. I've been going to vacation rental and short-term rental conferences for 25 years, speaking at them almost that long, I think that long. Meeting people that do what you do is probably the most valuable thing that you will ever do. When I was president, I would make everyone in the room stand up at the VRMA, and I would make them pass out business cards to each other and then promise to visit at least one person in another market and go see their
Mm,
operation and just do a cross collaboration. During my 20 years as a manager, we probably had 1,000 management companies come through our company and do the tour. And we gave a tour and showed them what we do. And I'll tell you what, I learned as much as they did, because they were like, oh, that's nice that you do it that way. What about this? And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And just being open and objective, that so many people will get really successful and they start thinking they know it all. Don't ever get there. Stay humble, stay hungry, right? So,
yeah,
so that's the piece. Just always be a learner. But
yeah.
networking and books, there are some new educational resources coming. There's a school that I'm involved in that's going to launch soon, to
What is it
be
called?
announced here shortly.
Oh,
But I'm just an advisor to it. I'm not a shareholder or anything. But I really believe in education in this industry and seeing that happen. But you don't see a lot of it. Where I would be remiss to mention, though, is also some of the podcasts. Obviously, you're providing great education. It sounds like you've had Jacoby on here and others.
mhm.
These guys are there's people that can really educate you through the podcast network, that type of thing. One cautionary tip, though, is some of the influencers are, they just come in and they say things that they say as facts, and everybody just goes, "Oh, that's," there's not a lot of substance behind it in some cases. So just be careful what resource you use in that regard. Make sure that they do have an actual
Very
proven
true.
track record of operating. A lot of them have been in the business for a very short period of time, and in your case, you're not just coming on and saying, "Here's how you do it." You're bringing on experts, and that's what I think you should do. And I'm not saying everybody has to be around as long as I do to know what the heck they're doing in this industry. That's not the case at all. But I definitely would be careful who you get your information from in that regard. So,
That's huge. And VRMA, by the way, because I feel like in this world right now, education wise, there's like the influencers, like the people that just came into this world. I feel like I'm in that bucket, right? Where it's like, I just came in the world, I'm trying to share knowledge, obviously brand new. And then there's obviously the OGs, which is where you are, where it's like the VRMAs, the education of, like, you guys have been around for 20, 30 years sometimes. I know,
sure.
just like Steve Schwab, even. There's the conversations I have with him is unparalleled. So I think it's really cool seeing the both worlds. But it's funny because it's gonna be my first VRMA, this
Oh,
next
awesome. Yeah.
upcoming one, and I'm speaking on a panel, which should
Nice.
be fun, with Tyann, which I'm
No,
sure you
Diane,
know.
well, that's great.
And so I'm excited for it. But any tips for VRMA, just personally for me?
Yeah, the
Um,
number one thing I tell everybody, and I'm actually going to give this tip I'm on the welcome wagon committee, whatever that's called, but yeah, and we're going to talk about
so you're
tips
gonna
for
be
your
there?
first show. Oh yeah, I'll be there.
Oh,
I
I'll
don't
say
miss
hi in
them.
person then.
Yeah, it's all about the networking. Just meet as many people as you possibly can. And you don't seem like a shy guy, but if anyone's listening and they're going to go to any conference, not just VRMA, just meet people. I see people come first time, and understandably they might be introverted or whatever. Just this is the one time you need to extrovert yourself and just come up. If you ever see me at an STR conference, I'll always be wearing a white hat, so I'm easy to find. I am very welcoming and open to talk to anyone. If you do that, I'll introduce you to a couple people, right? So let's just get it rocking, because the faster you meet like some of the key people or just great operators from different markets and whatnot, the
Mhm.
more you're going to learn. It's the number one thing I can give you, is just
Absolutely.
network your face off.
The The reason I'm going, honestly, originally, I bought my ticket originally, then I got invited on a panel. But the reason I really want to go is because I'm in the 100 right now, 110, 120-ish. So at this point, there's a lot of people that are just starting out, which is great, but I want to learn from people that are big. So if I do see you and you want to introduce me to any big operators, let me know because I would love to learn from them.
I know the vast majority of them. I'd be happy
Yeah.
to do that. You can just walk around with me and I'll introduce you to tons of them. Yeah.
So second question is, is there anything that you would do differently just as a person that did this industry from the get-go? If you got to start today, I know you alluded to some of those things, but I want to know, what would you tell maybe yourself back when you first started? Hey, these are things you want to do.
I would write myself a book right now that's probably 1,000 pages long and hand it to myself. But so that's a big time loaded question, obviously.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, one of the mistakes I see people doing is they just take on any old property at the beginning, and they have jerk owners. They have owners that aren't willing to upgrade. The property's shabby, whatever. Don't do that. Focus on quality properties with quality owners that you want to partner with long term. If you take on garbage just to get things going, you're going to have a garbage company. And pretty quickly, thankfully, I did that. I started only taking on what we sold through our real estate company and then furnished. So we ended up with really great inventory and great owners. And so I think that is a big thing that I made a mistake on. And the other one I already mentioned, but I'm just going to drive the point home one more time, and that's finance. Get your finances in order from the beginning, have clean books, have trust accounting. Those two things, I think, is just thoughtful inventory growth, really strong financial controls, and then obviously the third being the team. Don't be afraid to hire people, but do it with logic, with good financial controls in place, and get the right people so you don't have to let them go or wait till they leave like Patrick.
I love that. Amen. Last question. For people that really want to be like, wow, Steve, dang, you blew my mind this pod. You blew my mind. So I know there's people out there that are probably going to think like, shoot, how do I even freaking get in contact with this freaking guy? How can people get in contact with you?
First of all, connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn and I'm connected to a good part of the industry. Would love to connect with you on there. My email address is steve@bettertalent.com. Obviously, that's the website, bettertalent.com. We'd love to show you what we do. So you can book a demo right on the website, 20, 30 minutes. And frankly, we like to add value in that call, whether you end up working with us or not. So you'll learn some things along the way. That would be the number one thing I would recommend. And then if you go to any of the shows, I go to teen vacation rental, short-term rental trade shows a year. And so I'll be out there in my white hat. Would love to meet you in person, but at minimum, connect on LinkedIn. I would love to. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Steve. You've been a blessing. You dropped so much knowledge. I was so curious. I didn't even get to ask all my questions, to be honest, but all good. Thank you so much for jumping on and just dropping just bombs of knowledge, man. This is going to be instrumental for anybody that's looking to scale and grow their business anywhere. So thank you.
Thanks again for having me. Love to do that. One of the things I always ask, if people find something helpful, we'll pay it forward. Do the same later as you scale. So
absolutely,
this will help this industry grow, thrive.
You're the best. Appreciate it, Steve.
All righty. Thank you. Take care.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to the Patrick Real Estate Show. If you found this episode helpful, please give us a follow and leave us a 5-star review. Your support truly means a lot. And connect with Patrick in the show notes below. Until next time.